more sign holders back? Do you need more sign holders?
Yeah. Yeah. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for showing up in support of a very important matter concerning routine strip searches of incarcerated children, women, and men inside DOC facilities. I want to thank Representative Robin Porter for allowing us the space to expound upon what public hearings diminish with the 3 minutes. 3 minutes is not enough to talk about such a disturbing practice and the people who have and continue to be subjected on a regular basis. Strip search and policy will be read by Ms. Katie Hill, a member of Stop Solitary, so we all understand exactly how DOC defines what it does and why, so we are all very clear. As you heard the commissioner say and other correctional officials say, this deeply humiliating, degrading, and dehumanizing searches are done for safety and security. We feel they are about power and control, the ultimate control that people lose of their own bodies within DOC. What they should be seen, what the actions actually should be seen as repugnant to anyone who respects the human dignity of another human being. Nothing quite erases one's human dignity than being stripped nude, asked to place your hands up, face the wall, bend from your waist, spread your butt cheeks so an officer can look inside of your rectum searching for drugs and weapons. Men must lift their genitals, women must lift their breasts. If a woman is menstruating, she must take out her tampon. It's quite disturbing. In my humble opinion, it's a bit perverted. During the institution of slavery, this is exactly what people did. Matter of fact, what they're doing today is far worse. It's far worse than being on an auction and being stripped down and having your body viewed. You actually have to bend over and have someone look up your rectum. I think that's really disturbing. So one thing to mention is the narrative of safety and security does not pertain to officials in DOC. There have been numerous arrests of officers who have brought contraband inside of the prisons, and yet they are not subjected to strip searches. So I think that's a question that we need to ask ourselves. If the Department of Correction is saying that people must have this tool to keep drugs out of our system, then why is that not also done to correctional officers? States like New York and as far away as Tennessee, when any correctional facility, people come into facilities, they are going through a body scanner. So they know if they are serious about keeping drugs out of the system, that's what they should be thinking about doing here in Connecticut. So I want to pass this to Katie Hill, so who can read DOC policy on strip searching. Thank you, Katie.
So to best understand where Connecticut stands regarding strip searching inside DOC facilities, we can look to the State of Connecticut Department of Correction Administrative Directive 6.7. So this directive is entitled Searches Conducted in Correctional Facilities and became effective in 2014. We're going to focus on Section 3 and Section 7. So Section 3 provides the definition of a strip search. The directive states, quote, "A strip search shall mean a visual body cavity search, which includes a systematic visual inspection of an unclothed person's hair, body cavities to include the individual's ears, nose, mouth, underarms, soles of the feet, between the toes, rectum, and genitalia. This search shall also include a physical search of the clothing and any personal effects," end quote. Now, Section 7 provides specific information about strip searches, including where, how, and when they should be conducted. So Section 7, Part A, describes the conditions of which reasonable suspicion is not required to conduct a search. This includes a lot of things, including upon admission or return to a department facility, upon readmission to a facility from a halfway house, parole, special parole, transitional supervision, or any other community release program, upon inter-facility or out-of-state transfer, upon entering and leaving a level 5 facility or a designated level 5 housing unit, upon initial placement into a housing unit to include administrative segregation, chronic discipline, security risk group, medical inpatient, mental health, protective custody, and restricted housing, as well as the conclusion of any contact visit during a planned general facility search and during a facility emergency. Further, Section 7D describes controlled strip searches, which are stipulated to occur, for example, when an incarcerated individual refuses to comply with a search. A controlled strip search is described by the following in the directive, quote, in order to facilitate a controlled strip search, the incarcerated individual's clothing may be systematically removed manually or removed via medical shears, a portion at a time under the direction of a custody supervisor. If the incarcerated individual continues to be uncooperative, staff may manually position parts of the incarcerated person's body in order to view all areas of the incarcerated person's body, making every attempt to avoid physical contact with the genitals and rectum. The controlled strip search shall only seek to observe all areas of the incarcerated person's body to reasonably ensure the safety and security of the public, staff, and incarcerated individuals. Now, overall, Stop Solitary CT stands in support of Senate Bill 1196. There are certainly better, more humane, more dignified ways to conduct searches if they're deemed necessary. Even Commissioner Quiros stated in his public testimony just 2 weeks ago that strip searching is, quote, not something staff want to do. I can tell you personally, as a correctional officer in 1990, when I worked in the A&P room in Hartford for 3 years, it was the most unpleasant duty for any correctional officer or anybody to do, not just for the staff, but for the individuals under our care, end quote. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And talking with someone who actually been through a controlled search, it wasn't as nice as directive says that systematically, your arm was removed, your legs removed. People said that their clothes were actually cut off them because they refused to go through that humiliating search. I want to now bring up State Representative Robin Porter, who has supported us throughout this entire issue. Robin Porter, and I have to say myself, I really didn't realize that people went through this, but ever since I did find out, it's been very disturbing, and I haven't been able to let it go. And so my question is always, if people knew this was going on all these years, why is it no one ever questioned or challenged that kind of a disgusting policy? So, Robin Porter.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you all for being here. I stand in staunch support of this piece of legislation. And I have to tell you, just listening to the testimonies from the public hearing and the one-on-one conversations that I've had with people, it's past disturbing. It is dehumanizing. It robs people of their dignity, of their humanity, of what we're taught when we grow up. I'm a mother and a grandmother, and I know what I taught my children. I know what I'm teaching my grandchildren about, their body parts, who should touch them, who shouldn't touch them, where people shouldn't have their hands, how they should conceal themselves, not just be out and about exposing themselves. And then we learn, as Ms. Barber said, about what's going on. Now, yes, I did know that strip searches occur at jails and prisons. I did know that. If anybody knows my history, I am a mother of a formerly incarcerated individual. My son, my firstborn and only son. Never thought it would be my testimony, but here I am. And, I knew that when we visited him, that he would have to go through this, but I never realized what it was, what it entailed. And even to this day, after the public hearing, I reached out to him and I asked him a question around the strip searches. Actually, I asked him what I asked the commissioner, and the commissioner couldn't answer me. So I asked my son, during the non-contact visits that we had, were you ever subjected to a strip search? He said he couldn't remember. And that was a surefire sign to me that this was off limits, that this was not something that he wanted to talk about or discuss. And then I was made to remember there was a court incident. There was an arrest. And when I got to the prison to pick the individual up, I noticed he was limping. Got in the car. Had to take him immediately to the emergency room. And what had transpired was he had refused a strip search. So I'm not doing it. And they walked him around the corner in the jail where there were no cameras and commenced to beating him. And the doctor said it was by sheer luck. I said no, by sheer blessing. That nothing was broken. His finger was almost injured. That was the kind of beating he took because he refused a strip search. So we talk about, what was just mentioned and read around if you refuse, how they're supposed to conduct themselves. Well, I can tell you that was not the instance in this case. And it was something that I took to the commission at the time. And I won't go into the details of the conversation that I had with him, but what I will say is this: nobody should be above the law. Everyone should be held accountable, especially people who have the kind of power that our correctional officers and our police officers have. To whom much is given, much is required.
Amen.
And this bill, Senate Bill 1196, is a requirement. And it's just the beginning. It's just the beginning. I don't want people to think that we will be satisfied when this gets passed, because there's much more work to do behind what people are subjected to behind these prison walls. And we've got to be much more transparent. I just got back from Norway. Norway actually has a day every month where the public can go in and visit the prisons and visit with the people who are incarcerated to see what life is like. And I can remember when my son was in jail, I prayed. That was my prayer to God. I just wish that I could show up in this prison and walk a mile in his footsteps just to see what he's going through and what he's dealing with. And then to be elected and be able to take that walk through McDougal with the then former Commissioner Simple, I can't even begin to tell you what that felt like. So yes, I am standing here as State Representative Robin A. Porter, but I'm also standing here as a mother and a grandmother, a concerned citizen, and a community member who cares about people, no matter where they live, what they look like, or what they've done. They're still human beings, and we need to bring humanity. We need to center humanity in what it is we're doing when we talk about reform. Thank you.
The next person I'm going to bring up is going to be from Connecticut Justice Alliance, and then Terry Ricks will follow. But before she comes up, I just want to read something from a young man who recently was released from prison. I asked him would he come to the press conference and talk about it, and he said it was too humiliating to say publicly. He said, I felt like they took my manhood away, and I don't want to talk about that publicly. So this is just something that he wrote for me. Strip searches are the most unregulated actions performed by DLC, but yet the most intrusive. There are no hard formulas for such searches. Thus, officers create procedures as they go along. Strip searches can range from a naked offender squatting and coughing to determine if he or her is carrying contraband. It can also go to bending over at the waist, spreading your cheeks, being the most intrusive. These searches have the potential to re-traumatize prior victims of sexual assault. Most importantly, they put society at risk. Angry offenders usually turn to cognitive dissonance to justify the embarrassment of the search, making statements like, I put myself in here, this is part of the punishment. But then when released, these emotions become fuel for anger and resentment that usually resorts to the offender losing control and looking for the victim to channel his rage. Yet inmates brought to, I'm gonna change that, he wrote inmates. Yet formerly incarcerated people brought to segregation while being stripped by one officer conducting the search are forced to show their bodies to 7 other officers during their process. For all of this foregoing reasons, I'm asking for a complete oversight over DLC in regards to strip searching. And the one thing that I don't believe I mentioned during these searches that they're actually filmed. And I'd also like to know why are we filming these searches? Like, and then when I think about the officer who recently was arrested for filming a young girl in a store, it's a lieutenant here at DOC. And you have to wonder, did that voyeurism spill into from his job, or did he come with it? But these are the kind of things that are going on. Why are we strip searching these people in front of other officers and we put it on film? Those are questions we need to ask the Department of Corrections. So I'm now going to bring up Christina from Connecticut Alliance, and then Terry Bates.
Thank you, Barb. My name is Christina Carranza. I'm the Executive Director of the Connecticut Justice Alliance, here to support our Senate Bill 1196, which Robin Porter just told us needs to be a requirement, it needs to happen. I recently had the privilege of going inside of a few different correctional facilities here in Connecticut and spoken with different correctional officers and folks who are incarcerated there. And the correctional officers themselves shared, as you heard Barb just speak about, that strip searches are the least favorite, let's not even use that word, part of their job, right? They don't look forward to that, they don't want to do that, they would rather skip that. And they shared that if there are other ways to make sure that the population inside the prisons were safe and staff were safe, that they would be open to that. So we heard Commissioner Karos a couple weeks ago talk about why don't we have body scanners, why don't we invest in another way? As we've seen other states do around the country and other countries do around the world, and he answered that it costs too much, right? Cost is a concern and what it would cost to actually implement them in different facilities. However, we know that next month, in just a couple of days, there will be another prison closing here in Connecticut, and they really should invest the cost savings of that at least into this, if not back into communities who are harmed by mass incarceration. We know there's other ways to keep folks safe inside of prisons. We know there's other ways to keep staff safe. We need the political will to solve this issue, right? So the Department of Corrections and the Judicial Branch Court Support Services Division are both large institutions that we have given sort of the power and control of folks, right? Of children, of adults, of all different kinds of people, folks with disabilities, folks who are unable to stand up and speak for themselves. So it's our job to make sure that Senate Bill 1196 passes. We don't have the legitimacy to have a conversation about children and them committing crimes and what are we going to do about that when we're not ready to address the root cause of why they are, and when we further traumatize them when we detain and incarcerate them. A reminder for folks who don't know, there are young people and adults that are detained and incarcerated in the Department of Corrections and in the judicial branch facilities that are pre-trial, that have not been adjudicated guilty yet, right? They're innocent until proven guilty, yet they're subjected to these inhumane, traumatizing practices. And I brought a piece of the detention center manual with me today. It's 32 pages. It has a friendly picture on the front, and on page 9 it says, "Can detention center staff search me and my things?" Yes. It talks about staff doing frisk searches, searching areas that were used by you. Bullet 2 says, you will be strip searched when you first get to detention, when you come back to detention after leaving the property, or if detention staff thinks you may have items that are considered dangerous or not allowed in detention. So that's right on page 9 of the manual that kids and families get when their young person is detained, before they're even found guilty of anything, right, when they're just accused. I think my last point is, if you go back and watch the testimony from Commissioner Karos, which was just a couple weeks ago, it's available on YouTube. Right? Maybe we can post it on CGA's Instagram. But he talks about dry cell searches of people in the Department of Corrections, and especially again people who refuse strip searches, which is where the water is turned off in their cell and they cannot flush their toilet. Right? And if they're still not willing to consent to a strip search, then as Katie described, pieces of clothing are removed or cut off piece by piece. So we need to ask ourselves, if we're not willing to pass Senate Bill 1196, where does that leave us, right? We're just a piece of the problem, harming folks more. So CGA stands before all of you today, and all of us stand before you to say you must pass Senate Bill 1196, stop further traumatizing adults, stop further traumatizing children. There's better ways to do this.
Thank you. Thank you. Ms. Terry Briggs, Smart Justice.
morning. My name is Terry Ricks. I'm a formerly incarcerated individual. I'm a formerly sexually assaulted individual, and I'm a formerly individual that's been dehumanized by the Department of Corrections. They say strip searches are necessary. Some are necessary and some are not. 90% of them that they do are not necessary. How could you just, if I had a non-contact year and a half term visit, how am I getting contraband? But you're strip searching me, cavity checking me before and after my visit. My daughter wouldn't risk her freedom to bring me something in jail. But a lot of inmates say COs say they don't like it, but there's a lot that do. We have a lot of women that like women in the correctional. We have a lot of men that sodomize women in women's correction, so they enjoy those strip searches. I stopped going to visits for the last 10 months of my year and a half sentence because of the humiliation. So I deprived my daughter of seeing me. That's the only person who's coming. I deprived her of seeing me, of knowing if I was fine and well, because I had been sexually assaulted by several correctional officers going to and from visits. Another thing that was spoken about in these previous conversations that I just heard, there's a lot to unravel. It's a lot bigger than just the strip searches. Last young lady just said there's a unit at Nyan that housed 15, 16, 17-year-old individuals that had done adult crimes. I had them speak to my daughter when she came to visit me to deter her from anywhere thinking this is what could happen. Those young women are being exploited on Friday nights, stripping for people on their birthdays, being sexually assaulted. We're not helping them. We're hiring COs that clearly are predators prior to getting there. Because if your job is to come and to strip search somebody and make sure the prison is safe, then the COs need to be strip searched as well. We don't get anything in our prisons without them. There's no access. If I'm in here for a year, how am I able to get color television and extra food and drugs in there unless the outside person brings it in? And the only outside person I'm dealing with is a correctional officer. What are we going to do about these young kids that have to deal with these dehumanizing, forever traumatizing situations of being strip searched at a young age? They don't even know how to process it. I'm a 59-year-old young lady and I'm still processing. So what do we expect for our 15, 16-year-old to process from being violated for no apparent reason, but to gather control over your mind, your soul, and your body? If you don't buck the system will buck you. It will break you. Like they said, if you deny the strip searches, you can't go to the bathroom, you'll get a Class A. There is punishment for every time you buck the system. But if we don't buck the system, we will never come home. There is a lot of mistreatment going on around the strip searching of individuals being incarcerated. And I think that 1196 is not even a question if it should pass. This is the main. Because I am a surviving sexual assault from outside of prison and inside of prison. And I stand here today demanding that this bill be passed, so no other women can have to live with the traumatization that I did coming home from prison. Couldn't even sleep in my bed, slept in a bathtub because I didn't know who was coming. There is a lot of trauma from what they are doing. Jail's supposed to be rehabilitated. What are you really being rehabilitated? Animals? Victims become predators. despite if they choose to or not. So let's get this bill passed so we can stop what's going on in our prisons. Thank you for hearing.
Thank you. I want to prepare Kevinisha, Kevinisha Boyd, she's a former DOC employee, and then Terry Ricks is going to read a letter. But as Terry speaks about CEOs and the predators, I want to read another article. This is another person, a Department of Corrections official, arrested. This young man, 37 years old, was arrested for routinely inappropriately touching and harassing an inmate under his supervision, including creating opportunities to strip search the inmate, grabbing his genitals, and repeatedly calling his girlfriend. The arrest said that he grabbed the inmate's genitals and buttocks, and other officers knew what was going on but did nothing to intervene and stop. The officer was placed on administrative leave, and according to the warrant, the inmate said he was told the officer grabbed his genitals and asked him to sit on his lap. All the strip searches were conducted where the men were returned from court appearance, and this one officer made sure that he was the one who always strip searched this person. And the contraband he brought in for him included deodorant, boxers, shorts, and chewing gum. So again, officers are bringing in contraband, and we have to stop closing our eyes to that fact and pretend that we're doing this to human beings only because we're trying to keep drugs and contraband out of the system. We must acknowledge many officers are being arrested for that very same thing, and one just recently was arrested for bringing drugs. Actually had a Cash App system for people to pay him through Cash App to bring the drugs into the system. We don't want to talk about none of that stuff. We just want to talk about, the incarcerated people having contraband. But let's talk about some of the real victims of what's going on here. And so now I want to bring up Kevinisha Boyd. Like I said, she's a former DOC employee, and then Terry can read a letter from a female. Thank you.
Good morning, good morning. It is really hard for me to go after Terry's story, and I just want to offer some gratitude for her courage to share the story because it's heavy and it's real. So as Ms. Barbara said, my name is Kevinisha Boyd. I'm a licensed professional counselor and former mental health counselor for the Department of Corrections. I worked 6 years between Manson Youth, Cheshire Institution, and I spent the majority of my mental health career at New Haven Correctional. I resigned because people are dying, people are being traumatized, people are being abused, and people are being dehumanized. And that became a heavy burden for me as a mental health counselor. So my sole purpose of getting this job was to create a safe space for incarcerated people to be able to heal, to be able to rehabilitate, and to be able to process rooted trauma that they were already coming in with. That became impossible. Very, very impossible because I was up against, as Terry said, the system and the dehumanizing policies. And again, like Terry said, when you buck against the system, even as an employee, you're ostracized, you're teased, and that puts you in jeopardy of harm because if you need people to show up for you, they're not going to show up for you because now you're working with them because it's us versus them always. And you don't want to be on the them side if you need help. So that creates a real culture of toxic conformity to policies and mistreatment of incarcerated people. So you might be saying, well, you're a mental health counselor, so what was my involvement with strip searches was a lot. So I worked in New Haven Correctional, which is an intake facility, and that means people come up in the street with substance use issues, mental health issues, all kinds of issues. So a big responsibility for me was to actually escort incarcerated people from the admissions and processing center. So what that would look like is I go into a door, and literally the distance that Ms. Barbara is standing would be a row of incarcerated people being strip searched. Literally to my right, let's say where Katie is standing, is the phone where incarcerated people are asked to make the calls to their loved ones in this open area. Then here with this gentleman in the cranberry is the cage where other incarcerated people are waiting for their assessment. So in my testimony, I said it reminded me of a slave auction, and that's exactly what it was. There was no privacy, there was no dignity, there's naked men being strip searched here. So I go in, ask a correctional officer for whoever I am seeking to assess. They say X. Well, X actually might be being strip searched to my very visible left, and again, another person to my right. So where's the dignity in that? So now they say, okay, well, come back in 5 minutes. So I go back to get incarcerated person, bring them back to my office to ask these very intimate and detailed questions regarding mental health history. And I can't tell you how many times that process on admission and processing caused this barrier to treatment. So how am I gonna be this safe space for this person to say, I'm having thoughts of harming myself, or I'm not feeling well, or I'm hallucinating, I'm delusional? That is taken away, right? Because your dignity just got taken away, and you might be quite embarrassed that me, as your mental health counselor, just saw you cough, squat, and was seen naked. So what does that lead to really is people holding shame, and not just from the shame of what they may be already carrying in, but the shame of this dehumanizing strip search, and me, again, being the only safe, and I put it in quotes because it's really nothing safe, or no department safe in Department of Corrections. And that increases risk for suicide, right? Because as a mental health counselor, again, I'm supposed to be the person to make this assessment in terms of people are able to go into general population or not, and that opportunity is often taken away. It really is. And so on the other side that Terry mentioned in regards to the retaliation. So in moments of when incarcerated people would disclose that they were being abused or raped, they would not want to share this information because, one, after you disclose that, what happens is you're isolated into solitary confinement pending investigation, which then oftentimes leads into another degrading strip search. And then if the investigation goes through, you then sit back to your unit where the officers oftentimes share that information in regards to what happened, and then now that leaves other incarcerated people to tease you or ostracize you. So it leaves a lot of incarcerated people that do go through sexual violence and experience sexual violence in the correctional institution to keep it to themselves. Because on the latter end, there's not a lot that happens. And in my position as a former employee, when I would try to make some of these reports to lieutenants and captains, oftentimes nothing's done. I wrote plenty of page ones and incident reports, and nothing happens. Absolutely nothing happens. So now we just have this pervasive pattern, again, of people being sexually abused, lots of sexual violence, and nothing happens. So it really does create a re-traumatizing culture. And as we keep mentioning the re-traumatization, I think it's really most important to mention that the state had ordered a report by the State Sentencing Commission to look at the population in regards to mental health. And what we found was 70% of incarcerated people either have a mental health condition or have a history of a mental health condition. The 70% is never reassessed to say, for the people who have a history of mental health, what happens once you've gone through some of these traumatizing and dehumanizing practices? Your mental health is going to be exacerbated, it's going to worsen, and that again is going to put a lot of people at risk for suicide, a lot of people at risk for re-traumatization, a lot of people at risk for sadness and desperation. And there's no room for rehabilitation when we're adhering to policies and practices that don't honor the needs of the people. Really, Department of Corrections should be operating as a psychiatric hospital because that's essentially what it is. 70%, this is what we're doing to 70% of people. Ooh, see, I took some notes. Okay.
Yeah.
Also, what I want to say, so a lot of people brought up the commissioner's testimony, and he did testify that the correctional staff are 90% staff. So I want everybody to keep that in mind when the budget comes around, that let's not allocate the money into staffing because staff is short. Commissioner says that the staff is at 90% and that money should be reinvested into the community for jail diversion. So we can ensure that this 70% don't even make it into into incarceration, right? That money does need to be reinvested into more mental health staff, more nursing staff. That money does need to be reinvested into the discharging of incarcerated people. Where are they being housed? What are they doing? Do they have IDs? Do they have connection to family and friends? That's what we could be doing with that money rather than putting into the staffing. That's what I got. So again, it is with deep gratitude that Ms. Barbara is advocating for this, and I truly do believe we need this. It is unfortunate that we have to legislate rehabilitation for Department of Corrections, but here we are, and I pray that this bill does get passed for not just the safety of the incarcerated people, but the safety of Department of Corrections employees, again, for people like me who wanted to make a change and was not able to make a change because of the dehumanizing practices. Thank you.
Thank you. Terry, read the letter.
Yes.
And then Will has a letter from a male. Okay.
Before I start to read this letter, I want to talk about something that the Queen spoke about. She was a correctional officer for 6 years. Mental health, she's still in corrections for 6 years. She has not yet once mentioned that strip search was being recorded, as the Department of Correction claims. All strip searches are not being recorded. The ones that they're trying to cover their tracks are being recorded. But the ones that they are clearly in violation, there's not a recording. Because just do the math. The commissioner said he's unaware. If there was recordings, he should be aware. There's no recordings. So now it brings you to, I would now like to read the testimony provided by 2 separate women who are currently incarcerated at York. I will not share their names to help retain some confidentiality and privacy. Testimony 1. As someone who has been incarcerated at York Correctional Institution for many years, I am well qualified to speak about strip searches, a practice I have been forced to undergo innumerable times. Strip searches are one of the most humiliating, intrusive allowances that occur in prison facilities. They serve little practical value and often both misused and overused in penal institutions. For example, they are sometimes used as punishment when a prisoner says or does something that makes a guard angry. To quote, a supervisor sometimes is done just to remind them that they're enemies. Very little contraband is recovered during most strip searches, as most unauthorized or illegal items are not conveyed by outside visitors. It's usually an inside job. Not only are strip searches highly invasive, but they are also extremely sexualized, erotic even. Many residents consider this act a state-sanctioned striptease or even view it as visual rape. During the strip search, before the gaze of the same-sex guard, as I also spoke, an incarcerated woman is required to remove each item of clothing until she is completely naked. The guard then puts on latex gloves and fingers through the items one by one. The woman is made to stand barefoot on a dirty tile floor, face the guard as she canvasses her naked body from head to toe. If her hair is up, she is instructed to let her hair down and tousle it. The guard then instructs her to open her mouth so she can peer inside. The woman must lift and flick her tongue. If the woman is wearing dentures, she is required to remove them before the guard conducts any oral exam, subjecting her to further humiliation. After her mouth is examined, the woman must lift up her breast. And as we lifting up our breasts during the strip search, they are fondling. Like if we got pockets under it, it makes no sense.
Is that it? Cause I'm sorry. I don't
Yeah,
wanna- I don't
this
wanna
ain't,
put you
this
through
is, this is,
I don't
this
want-
is tough, but the woman is the, I gotta do this. This is what we fight for. I wouldn't do this, it wouldn't be me if I didn't. The woman is then ordered to face the wall so that the guard can examine her backside. She is then instructed to show the soles of her feet. Finally, the guard directs her to bend at the waist, pull her buttocks up, opens to fully expose her anus, vulva and vaginal orifice, and cough incessantly to propel and conceal items from her body. If she is menstruating, she must remove her tampon in full view of the guard and perform this bend, swallow, and cough routine just the same. In a notoriously crash and demeaning command some guards issue while a woman is in the most vulnerable position is to show me that pink, meaning to stretch one's vagina so completely open that the guard is able to view up in the vaginal canal. At this point, after the guy has visually examined the woman's most intimate part to her satisfaction, the woman is instructed to get dressed. If new hires are undergoing on the job training, they are permitted to observe the strip search without the woman's consent. There have been a few incidents where a female guy has brought lubrication into the strip room. That happened to me. I personally know of only 2 women who have experienced this, and both women refused to allow the guy to perform this highly illegal internal examination. Nothing was done on either of these occasions. When this incident was reported, although a degree of privacy is provided while strip searches are conducted, for example, portable screens are erected in the gymnasium. Male staff freely walk about the immediate vicinity and can peer into areas where these searches take place, even if done accidentally. I recall one instance when a female guard approached the cell to strip search both myself and my roommate, a woman upwards of 300 pounds. As the female guard entered the cell, a male guard out of a dozen present followed her to the room and stuck his booted foot into the door to keep the door ajar. His head turned away for privacy. His female co-worker proceeded with the search as much fully disrobed roommate pulled her butt cheeks apart, bent deeply over, and coughed. The male guard substantially blew a raspberry imitation of the sound of passing gas. The incident proved just how present and particularly that this man prison guard was in the strip search. Even if he was present and participated was superfluous, there is no real privacy in prison or protection from this type of obnoxious conduct. The practice of strip searches continually reminds us of women that the moment we enter a prison, not only does our body no longer belong to us, but now it is also became a spectacle, an object of corporate exploitation. Most women in prison have already been sexually violated, and by allowing these searches, the state of Connecticut is sanctioning the continuation of the cycle of objectification and violence. Thank you.
I now want to bring up our Connecticut State Child Advocate, Sarah Egan. And then we have a young lady.
Yeah, I'm right here.
Oh, okay. She's gonna talk about being a child.
Well, good morning, everybody, and this is such an important event, and thanks to the folks at the ACLU and Staff Solitary for being here today and people's personal testimonies, which is so powerful. As the State Child Advocate, our office has a statutory responsibility to review conditions of confinement for all incarcerated children, youth, and young adults through age 21 across the state of Connecticut. And a couple of things I want to emphasize today. We are also talking about children and practices across state agencies that deal please remember that in the state of Connecticut, a child as young as 10 years old can be arrested and incarcerated in the state's detention facilities. We know that even over the last year, children as young as 13 are incarcerated, detained in detention facilities, which means that they too are subject to the policies and practices that the Justice Alliance read to all of you this morning. That means a strip search upon intake and admission to the facility, a strip search when you are on close observation due to concerns of self-injury. We know that children in the Department of Correction as young as 15 years old may be strip searched. And I want to emphasize, as other folks have talked about, that the children, many children who interface with the justice system from a young age have experienced before they ever step foot in a detention or prison facility significant deprivation and trauma. The impact of being incarcerated, of wearing a uniform, of being called by, this is the adult system, only your last name and never your first. The whole process of it was so dehumanizing and so anathema to what we know about what children need, the importance and critical need that they have to trust in the adults around them is impossible in these settings, particularly in our adult facilities. And you can't be both rehabilitative and dehumanizing. It can't be, I can go to class, but then I come back and I'm locked in my cell for 6 hours. These are children. It can't be that if I want to participate, as I've heard in some of the testimony on this bill, from a college professor who comes into the prison to teach young adults and testified that the students who sign up for her class in the prison are strip searched after they leave. We heard today people who avoid visiting with their family because they're strip searched as the price for that. We have seen in our review of conditions in our last report, we reported several incidents where older youth, 18, 19, 20 years old, have refused strip searches. And because they refuse strip searches, they're placed in in-cell restraints for indeterminate periods of time until they give in. And in not one of those incidents that we reviewed was any contraband found. So why did they refuse the search? Because it's so painful, because it's so degrading, it's so humiliating, and it is hard for a human being to consent to that. Not that it's consent, because it's not consent. And that's the response. And that just cannot continue. We think about the girls, the children who are incarcerated and have been incarcerated in New York, girls, 15 years old, 16 years old, 17 years old. I have never once in my time doing this work reviewed the records of an incarcerated girl and not found that she had a history of child abuse. That's what buys a ticket for our girls into the prison system.
Yeah, that's right.
Right? And we need to be helping these children. We know this. You know, the number of officials from the Department of Corrections over the years who have told me and members of my staff, these kids don't belong here. That's right. When are we going to act on that? These kids don't belong there. Right? And no one should be subjected to these searches. But it's I just want to remind folks that we are talking about policies and practices that impact children in these settings. And I just want to echo one other theme that was brought up today several times: transparency and accountability. That's why the state legislature created an Office of the Child Advocate that can go into settings where children are, whether they're hospitals, whether they're schools, whether they're prison systems to look at what's happening for children, you know, in places that people can't see. And we're obligated to do that and to report out and to support and advocate for system changes for children. And now there's an Office of the Correctional Ombudsperson. The state cannot sustain systems that serve highly vulnerable populations that are not completely transparent and accountable. We learn over and over and over again what happens to children, what happens to elderly people, what happens to people with psychiatric illness, what happens to incarcerated individuals when no one is watching. Only a couple of years ago, the Public Health Committee is listening to hours and hours and hours of testimony about what happened to Mr. Al-Shahadi at Whiting Forensic. And while this is not about that, it is about that. And the way that he was systematically dehumanized and made to feel like an animal. Why? I could have cut the hearing way short because nobody was paying any attention. Because there was no accountability and no transparency. And our systems that serve vulnerable people, whether we think people got to those places on, because of their own behavior or not, the systems in our state that serve vulnerable people should have floor-to-ceiling windows around the machinery of that work and that service delivery. Because you know what happens when they don't. So, thank you for letting me be here today. The last thing I just wanted to say is that the American Bar Association recently, recognizing the unique vulnerability of children in the prison and detention systems, passed a resolution urging all federal, state, local, territorial, and tribal governments to adopt policies and contractual provisions that prohibit conducting strip searches of children and youth except in the most of exceptional circumstances. So we have a lot of work to do. Thanks very much.
I just wanted to ask the press if they have any questions. I know I've kept you for a while. Are there any questions?
Yeah, pass this bill.
That's it. We got to pass 1196. And I do want to bring up, because for me, it's an opportunity for a young person to talk about the experience, because for me, I want to keep front and center. These are not just men and women, these are children that are going through this traumatic experience. So if you could come up shortly and, talk about it. Thank you.
I'll be brief. It's been a while since I've been in the juvenile detention center, obviously. But, I wanted to talk about the first strip search I went through. This is when my father was incarcerated for cannabis. I was 17 years old. I had finished my high school coursework early. I graduated half a credit over. So next month is going to be 21 years since this strip search at York. I was inmate number 299678. And what they don't tell you is, so the instructions I was given when I was there, it was the older ladies who helped me. A lot of them were coming back from court run. And I began to cry because the CO told me, after checking the soles of my feet, bend over until you can see me and spread them. And I'm a child. I'm 17 years old in a room full of women. The girl next to me was 16. She had taken $80 off of mom's credit card. And, the other inmates started to tell me, if you don't do it, they're going to send you to SEC. You're going to be by yourself. Just do it. I promise it'll be quick. And it went pretty quick. And I thought, kind of like a juvenile detention center, they won't have to do it that often. Until I got my first visit, and it was not a contact. I had never been to prison before. I haven't been back. But there was a non-contact visit with my mother, and I really wanted to see my mother. And I had to go through another strip search. On the way to see my mother, talk to her through glass and phone. And then afterwards, on the way back, they had to strip search me again. I was confused. they had to strip search me on a non-contact visit with the bail commissioner. I was a child, and this still goes on, and the commissioner of DOC has done absolutely nothing to stop this. During the pandemic, while people were overdosing, they were strip searching inmates when I don't understand why they weren't getting visits and yet people were still overdosing. We're not strip searching the guards. Guards have already testified about the amount of man hours it takes to do this. So we're talking about real tax dollars being used to strip search children instead of using that money instead for body scanning technology. So you have to wonder if children are being strip searched at the threat of being isolated and stripped without their own consent. Why are they fighting for this, and why are we spending tax dollars on this when there's much easier ways to do this? You have to imagine the savings from, segregation, the savings from the man hours it takes to do this. And as long as children continue to suffer through this, I don't know what results the state of Connecticut's expecting, because no one really talks about it, but we're all really angry about it.
And please pay attention what she said 21 years ago, and she still brought the tears. So the pain doesn't leave when they leave prison. So we're doing a lot of harm to a lot of people, to a lot of children. Those children with that pain and rage are coming back to our communities. And somebody's gonna pay the price for that anger. We talk about getting tougher on kids. What we need to do is ask them what happened to you in that system, that you're so angry that you just want to strike out at everybody. Let's take some accountability for what this state is allowing to happen to thousands of people. What they are doing is not about safety and how, it's not about safety, safety and security. I should know that. I hear it so much. Everything is about safety and security. The reality is, it's about power. It's about control. It's about how to dehumanize people. This is what slavery was about. When they brought the Africans here, the first thing they had to do to make them be who they wanted them to be is to strip them of all their humanity. And we're still doing that. So we have, and for the commissioner to say this is a necessary tool, it just infuriates me. Strip searching exhibits a deprived indifference to the human dignity of children, men, and women every day. And it also shows a deprived indifference to the well-being of those people once they leave outside of these cages. And I really, truly believe the one thing we don't want to talk about, race is at the center of it. This is why the system is full of Black and brown people. And so when people can look out and see, well, that's happening to those other people, then they can close their eyes to what's happening. But we should be so ashamed. And so passing on SB 1196 is just the beginning, because there's loopholes for them to continue doing what they're doing, because they're gonna always find probable cause. But my thing is, while you're finding probable cause, make sure you remember you strip search those officers, because we're finding that they've been bringing in drugs. Didn't start. I can show you stories from way back where they've been bringing drugs in, and then the most recent, just last year. Cash App. They've gone from coming to your house years ago. That's what they do. The officer comes to the house from the family, get the money and get the drugs. Now they Cash App. They promoted their business, making thousands and thousands of dollars. And yet we're stripping everybody every day and finding very little of anything, but using that excuse for doing it. I think it's time that we do something about it. And I just want to thank everybody that showed up today. I know it kept me longer than I intended, but thank you so much. And I hope that everybody will be pushing as much as they can to get judiciary to vote our bill out of committee, number one, get it passed, and make sure our governor signs. And that's an uphill battle right there, because we did that with the Protect Act. We fought, got it passed, and the governor didn't sign it.
Implement.
But now, he's not running again, so he doesn't have to listen to any of us. But we're gonna still push anyway and hope that he will, have a heart somewhere to say, we need to stop doing this in the state of Connecticut to these thousands of people. And shame on you for all the harm you've already caused. Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, I wasn't, there's one bill on that stage, but actually slate. Theirs is at the end of the year.
Oh, yeah.
7, 8 after. I know. It's part of the same as but yeah, they would send me so. And then I have to think about what my dad's doing this, and I realized my dad had to do that. We didn't know that, we thought that. So, yeah, it was about to go from that side, it was that one is weird. There's one kid asked about afterward. It's mandatory that government so that's there's a
I mean, just like the top CEO who just got arrested.
Yeah.
You know.
I know that wouldn't make a difference to a lot of kids. For me, I would must have kids that were mailing me last year. For 2 years,
You've been busy. It's all coming.
a number of officers that are stuck in there. But that's what I'm saying, that's a lot. But it is concerned, so there's that's why I said,
That's actually. The meeting is online now. Yeah, just the meetings and lawyers to try to work out. It's already out. That's public hearing already. I would send it to the chairs and bring them everything. Well, here, it's education. It's a mess. It's a mess. And then for the chairs. I was so glad that should be. Because I have some doctors say, yeah, Jeff Curry. Yeah. Email me, together.
they don't want to face that. They don't want to face that. Even though all of them are getting arrested.
That's okay. I mean, so you can send them your story.
I have to move back to this group.
Gus,
I think you get it done. I'm gonna have to get in touch with you about first couple of more special.
well, I will, no, I'm gonna say, yeah, I know I'll see you anyway, but you, you're maintained, right? So I will cancel you later. Okay, thank you so much, too. Let me know when you have the video ready.
That's great. Yeah.
They had public hearing. And I think they're wavering whether that they.
I mean, that one was the first one I seen. Across the board, no matter what part people were like, you know, so.
So what do you do? Like, you know, I don't know nothing about it.
I mean,
Oh,
Wow,
can you send it?
I'm actually, yeah, all my friends on this. We both know.
But I think. Yeah.
Good luck to you, okay?
different ways to upload it digitally to the internet.
Okay.
Does that work?
That works. Don't ask me how you do it.
Right.
I know you can. Okay.
Thank you so
I
much.
can see you later. Thank you. Yeah.
One day at a time. I see. No, it was, yeah, it was.
Right.
Oh, no, for sure. How you doing, Miss Fair? How do you feel about the advisory meeting? You know what? I was thoroughly, I didn't know surprised with her, but I thought Johnson told me, he was trying, it seemed like to